First things first, the sense of entitlement that I've seen from some of the big review channels out there upset because they didn't receive a Forspoken review code is astounding. Let's get it right. The way the codes were distributed seemed a little shady and we're starting to see why, but some of these big channels are now outright refusing to review the game, which is punishing their viewers more than anybody else, and boo-hoo, you didn't get a code. Put your hand in your pocket like everyone else, and so what? The review's gonna be late. Some viewers likely make their decision to buy games based on your opinion. It's pretty shambolic if you ask me, but anyway, right now you're currently watching a pissy tin pot channel with under 7,000 subscribers, and I was absolutely ecstatic to be given a code and the opportunity to review the game. Granted, I was a little less ecstatic once I'd actually played Forspoken, but still, it's appreciated nonetheless. As soon as I saw that Forspoken is a story that sees a very troubled young woman being transported from her everyday normality to a fantastical world of wonder and intrigue, I immediately recognized the inspiration behind this narrative.
Oh, this must be a takeoff on that Alice in Underpants movie I saw.
Forspoken is a story that's written and structured in a way that clearly thinks very highly of itself. I was met with a barrage of cutscenes that I had barely 5 seconds of gameplay between each one. Now granted, a lot of games will show the player the ropes in this fashion early on, but we're talking 3 hours before I genuinely felt the game trusted me enough to actually let me play. Some of the vocal performances are pretty good and spoken with some conviction, but the technical execution of these vocals made the whole scene feel lifeless and wooden. By technical execution, I'm talking about the lip syncing and the timing between each character's sentence being spoken. They're painfully slow. It drove me absolutely insane, to the point where I quit the game to go and eat my lunch at 9:30 in the morning while looking out of the window.
When it comes to trespass on sacred ground, girl. Especially not when the ground in question belongs to one so powerful. It was your fault the city was attacked.
You leave these huge pauses in your sentences. What do you expect me to do?
The pauses and the transitions are equally poorly executed, using this long-winded fade to black to mask loading times between cutscenes and gameplay when so many other games have risen the standards of what to expect when the player seamlessly blends from watching to playing. Now, I'm sure I'll be accused of having my own agenda by even daring to mention this, which is patently untrue, but Forspoken feels like it's strongly pushing the power to the females agenda. I don't give two shits if the protagonist is a man, a woman, or even if they identify as a lamppost. I am not bothered in the slightest, so long as the characters feel believable and faithful to the narrative. I love Lara Croft, Jill Valentine, Claire Redfield, Senua. I even loved the role Abby played in The Last of Us Part 2, which might trigger some people, but every female character in Forspoken is someone of importance and power, whereas every bloke that I met seemed to be some moronic, bumbling Neanderthal. I mean, even the gangsters of New York are led by this complete whopper. I thought New York was meant to be well hard, because I tell you what, you come round Moss Side in Manchester dressed like that and you are getting your head taken clean off. The main protagonist, Frey, actually does have her moments that hit the right note. The idea that she was abandoned at birth and the troubles that inevitably follow such a cruel start to life, as well as the occasional relationship that she builds on her journey, genuinely do evoke a real sense of emotion. The best stories ever told walk the full length of the emotional spectrum from end to end, but it felt like Frey was intended to spend most of her time at the comedic end of the spectrum, and it just falls flat. I love the F-bomb. I use it pretty much every day. It's like a little release valve for me, but the shameless and tasteless amounts of times that Frey comes out with it just felt like it was trying to be edgy for the sake of it, when in reality it just felt pointless. I can just imagine the big chief, the big boss man over at Square Enix giving his writing team the bollocking of a lifetime, and all the while wondering why they even picked up such vulgar language to use in their scripts after the reviewers have heavily criticised the excessive use of expletives.
They shouldn't be shouting at me! It should be shouting at you! And do you know why? Because it's and we're to that wrong with it! Get your fingers out! Where's your bottle gun? I can't pay attention when I'm talking to you! If you don't want to off, there's thousands of kids out there who die. Put that back on the shit what you can do, or off home on the plane. You got that?
So many strange decisions have been made throughout Forspoken, like the character Cuff, who's the magical talking sentient bracelet that's found himself wrapped around Frey's arm. He offers Frey help to navigate the sprawling landscapes of Athia, but he'll provide relentless commentary on whatever's happening, and while I didn't actually find him to be as offensive as others seem to have, it's another area where the attempts to please everyone can often lead to pleasing no one. There's an option in accessibility options to shut him up entirely, which I've seen similar options in Biomutant and High on Life. I've never understood the need to mute a character. If you're writing them into your game, then write them into your game. It's almost like the playtesters complained about him, so they added this option, but then reading the description of Cuff in his little bio, they themselves described him as having seemingly endless sarcastic commentary, so they knew what they were doing when writing him in. Either stick to your guns or rewrite him entirely. It's these sort of flaky decisions that crop up again and again, unfortunately, showcasing a lack of belief in their own vision. The accessibility options are decent though, offering little tweaks to the gameplay that genuinely do add a player-friendly level of customization while still remaining faithful to the gameplay on the whole. Auto pickup, auto lock on, auto parkour, slow motion menu scrolling, or completely paused menu scrolling, just to name a few. I was hoping this would be the turning point in this review for me to start talking about the positives in Forspoken, but unfortunately I'm not quite there yet. The performance, it's been so poorly optimized, and while I've seen a lot of the pre-release reviews on PS5 providing a slightly smoother experience than on PC, the resolution looks to drop drastically to get it running smoothly, and even then there's still the odd dip in the frame rate, but that's only from what I've seen. From what I've played though, which is on PC at 4K and a 3090 graphics card, an 11th gen i9 and 32 gigs of RAM, I've still got to drastically lower most of the settings to standard and set DLSS to performance mode to achieve 60 FPS, and even in some of the hectic moments of combat with the visually impressive and visceral explosions of purple and gold, it can even drop into the mid-40s. Forspoken does have some genuinely impressive visuals at times, while other areas the textures look flat, lifeless, and nowhere near deserving of such aggressive requirements. There's certain areas of the map too, even outside of the combat, that just tank the frame rate, often areas that are dense with foliage, so performance-wise it's been really disappointing. There are some really promising moments of gameplay and mechanics that, while not perfect, they certainly get the juices flowing. The parkour is probably the game's standout feature. It feels unique, darting across the map at electrifying speeds, and it's games like Spider-Man and Dying Light 2 that have unique parkour systems themselves, making the simple journey from A to B a fun thing to experience. The mechanics expand as you progress too, with Frey's abilities and stamina increasing, the fluidity grows, and new techniques will see Frey flying across the map at frightening speeds. I did have a few moments of frustration that are maybe more along the lines of user error than gameplay error, but ultimately it's a big fat tick in the box for the parkour aspect of Forspoken. The combat mostly feels good, it's fast and frantic, but one aspect I wasn't too keen on was there was no need to block. It's an automatic process. Timing your block perfectly is fun in pretty much every variation of combat mechanics, but in Forspoken it's done a little differently. Instead of timing your block, you have to time your counter right after the auto block has been executed, and this is timing based, and pulling it off perfectly will restore a big chunk of Frey's health. I didn't feel as rewarded as if I was to block for myself, because it's more of a recovery system rather than a prevention system. Bloodborne was perfect in that regard, still earning back a big chunk of health, but you'd need to execute a perfect parry without getting hit. Risk and reward instead of mistake and recovery. Frey's got spells that are dedicated to your right and left triggers, and swapping between them is done in a slow motion radial menu via their respective bumper buttons. You're graded on each counter, similar to Devil May Cry, with the more extravagant skills that you pull off without receiving damage, resulting in more enemy drops and more XP. Similar to Frey's parkour skills, you'll unlock new spells as you progress, with new magic sets that vastly improve the combat's feel overall. To be honest, I actually felt the game's post-story content was when I felt the full force of what the game had to offer, which is a shame really, because while I don't want to spoil every magic set for you, unlocking them all is part of the story, and once achieved, the whole combat model shines through. Just a shame it's right at the end of the game. The dodging mixed with parkour is really fun to execute, and watching Frey's outrageous maneuvers during combat is a genuine treat, but amalgamating all her spells together can make the whole encounter feel a little disjointed at times. Constantly hopping in and out of the left and right bumper radial menus to switch spells hurts the fluidity of the combat. With so many to choose from, I would have preferred a combination of buttons options to make use of Frey's magic instead of constantly bogging down the combat's flow by hopping in and out of these radial menus. The enemy variety isn't that big either, and their methods of attack let down the variation even more. Keeping your distance is a basic tactic that saw me through most encounters successfully. The boss battles offer a little more challenge though, which is to be expected with some visually grandiloquent encounters looking undeniably good and even offering a nice variation from their attack patterns and the different phases within the fight. The combat certainly has its moments visually, and while I've definitely got some issues with the way certain aspects were implemented, some of Frey's majestic animations were a genuine joy to witness. I just wanted more of it instead of constantly slowing down the fight. Spellcraft challenges can be applied to 3 spells at once, and completing those challenges will increase that spell's power, and Frey's magic skill that you've unlocked can even be reversed. So if you've picked a skill that you're not too happy with, you can get a refund. There's a joke in there somewhere, but you know, it just felt a little too easy. The crafting and customizing systems feel a little stitched on, to be honest. You've got fingernail designs that can be applied to each hand, improving Frey's skills and offering another little insight into the life of a female. I'm sure there's blokes with painted fingernails out there right now who've just turned this video off in utter disgust, but never mind. Frey's also got cloaks and necklaces that can have certain perks applied to them that feel tangible, like restoring health when killing an enemy, for example, but other stat boosts that can be applied, like 2% extra this and 5% extra that. Honestly, I can't stand those types of little boosts in any RPG game, so Forspoken isn't exactly the first to go down this road, but sadly it happily followed the others that have. There's a ton of activities to take part in the sprawling open world of Athia, with the side quests being called detours, offering mostly more of everything I've already mentioned, finding these huge beasts to tackle. There's these underground dungeons with an obstacle course of enemies and a unique boss to take on at the end. There's flashback monuments that are usually time-based trials. I like these sort of activities. While I'm kind of over the open world tropes and bloat, these activities I can live with. There's some that just feel like filler, and Forspoken has these too, unfortunately. There's these towers that scope out the nearby area at the press of a button. You don't even need to climb them. Monuments that are covered in rock and you've got to shoot the rock off. Hardly engaging. A dice game that can be played once and whatever it lands on gives you a little perk. That's not a game, you just roll it once. You can take photos for a child that's asked you to. There's also this clear obsession with cats that's been written into the narrative, which we're introduced to early in New York as we take care of Frey's cat, Homer.
What kind of stupid wiener name is that?
There's a few cat activities in Athia. One way you'll follow a cat to pick up an item that can be traded, and another way you can find these cat statues that are home to a strange cat familiar that you'll have to slowly sneak up on. It's pretty easy, it makes no sense whatsoever, and once you've done that, you'll have unlocked that cat so they can visit one of the many pilgrims' refuges that you'll have found so you can stroke it. The pilgrims' refuge that I just mentioned, these are your basic fast travel and resting points that Frey can visit. Ultimately, it is still a very fun world to traverse thanks to the parkour mechanics, especially gathering the brightly lit mana pools that Frey needs to unlock new spells. There's a tiny sprinkling of enjoyable side activities to take part in, but far too many of them left me feeling unrewarded and empty inside. Ultimately, Forspoken was a game that on face value showed huge potential and looked to be getting 2023 off to a flyer before the demo and the full version released. I'm gutted, I really am, and to be asking for £60 or $70 or whichever part of the world you're in, it's an absolute travesty. I imagine the prices are going to plummet, and sharpish too, and while there are elements of the game like the parkour and aspects to the combat model that have promise, ultimately I just cannot recommend Forspoken. £15 or less, it might be worth a weekend session, and there's obviously the demo to try too, which I'd highly recommend before buying. Let me know your thoughts though from what you've seen so far, or even if you've played the game yourself. I'd love to know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.